Still on a topic about emotional again, and today I'm with the topic of compassionate. Again, from greatergood.berkeley .edu, talk about 6 habits of highly compassionate people. I want to gain my compassionate. Actually, uh, talk about six habits that we can practice to improve to gain the compassionate to other people. Habit number one: try to research tested compassion practices. And number two, and try informal compassion practice too. Number three, set an intention. Number four, collect your own data. Number five, get support. And number six, be open to possibilities and compassionate toward yourself. Start with number one. Uh, Try to research tests compassion practices. Preli- Preliminary research from a variety of randomized controlled trials suggests that compassion can in fact be enhanced through systematic training programs. For example, the 8-week compassion cultivation training (CCT) course that was developed by Tom Ten, Jin Par, professor, doctor, and colleagues at Stanford University's Center for Compassion and Altruism Research and Education suggests that adults can indeed improve compassion for themselves and reduce fear of compassion for themselves and for others. Even if you don't or can't take a research validated training program, there are numerous ways to build your compassion muscle, many of which are described on Greater Good in Action (GGIA), the GGSC libraries of science-based practices. Some of these practices involve meditation, such as loving kindness. Others are writing excuses, such as one that asks you to describe a time when you felt a strong bond with another person. Many of the practices in both GGIA and the structured training program range from 10 to 30 minutes in length. As with most exercise, the more you do them, the more you do them, the more you will likely reap the benefits. However, something is better than nothing. For example, if your physical exercise goal is to take 10,000 steps a day and you only take 3,000, that's still better for your health than taking none. Meditation is similar. While the intention may be 20 or 30 minutes of daily compassion meditation, some practice is better than no practice, and you are maintaining your intention and routine, which will only increase the likelihood of your continuing this intention and routine the next day. Notice if this all or nothing mentality with your compassion practice is hindering you, and see if you can test the something is better than nothing theory. And this is habit number one: try to research tested compassion practices. And number two, habit number two, Try informal compassion practices too. While there is lots of research supporting those kinds of compassion cultivating practices, there is also a place for informal, moment to moment practices throughout the day. For example, you could notice when compassion comes easily or spontaneously for you throughout the day. For example, watching the evening news. You could notice when you resist acknowledging or being with suffering your own author throughout the day. For example, when passing someone on the street who is asking for money or an extended family member who is challenging. Throughout the day, you could notice when you judge or minimize suffering. For example, saying that it doesn't count or it's significant compared to someone else or something else going on in the world. We often notice suffering, our own and that of others, but quickly dismiss it and thus don't allow ourselves to be emotionally touched or moved by the suffering, the second component of compassion. This kind of awareness of the presence or absence of compassion can provide some valuable information to you. So the next time you are standing in line at the grocery store, instead of looking down at your phone or watching how quickly the surrounding lines are moving, I'm guilty of both. Take a moment to consider the common humanity of the people who made your grocery trip possible. The people who grew the food, transported the food, and stocked the shelf, or even the cashier who is about to help you. Perhaps you could take a moment of appreciation for each of them. If you choose, this could be an opportunity to acknowledge the interdependence that surrounds us. Our lives, even simple trips to the grocery store, are supported by countless authors. The habit number three, set an intention. Renowned meditation teacher Jack Cornfield once wrote that setting one's intention is like setting the compass for one's heart. Our intention helps guide our efforts to be compassionate and helps remind us when we are choosing to see time aside for compassion cultivating practices. When I teach compassion, I pose questions for my students such as this. What is bringing you to the practice today? What do you want for yourself? What do you want for your life? What do you have to offer the world? While while these are indeed big questions, asking them allows us to ponder our intentions or why we are trying to strengthen our inner skill of compassion. For a week, try setting an intention before you start your compassion meditation practice and notice whether this intention helps clarify your purpose. At times, this intention can come up again throughout the day as a means of renewing your commitment to practice compassion, even when you are living life off the cushion. And habit number four, collect your own data. Research is probably probabilistic. Just because something works for most people or people in research study doesn't mean that it will work for you. As I always tell my students, in order to get the most convincing data, be your own laboratory. Run the short experiment. For example, a couple weeks or a couple months. Collect your own data. Do you feel more compassionate toward yourself, loved ones, stranger, difficult people? When utilizing formal sitting meditation and informal, slightly reciting loving kindness phrases to yourself while waiting in line or Trader Joe, compassionate practices, compassion practices. Students in my compassion training classes receive a workbook which contains a daily practice log and space for comments. Since the practice is different every day, it's important that we spend time, even if just a few minutes, reflecting on that the practice was like for us. When what came up, where did our attention wander to during the practice? How did our intention guide our practice? And so on. Without without reflection, these practices can become another thing on a lengthy daily to-do list. It is only with reflection that we can get a sense of whether these practices are actually benefiting us immediately or in the long term. Additionally, I invite students even when they are don't practice to still log a zero for practice time for the day and to also write down what they did instead of doing the practice. Catch up on email, sleep in, went to the gym, watch TV, and so on. This allow us to continue the routine of logging and reflecting, and also allow us to examine patterns to the days where we are not practicing. Perhaps that we are choosing to do instead of meditating is a higher priority, or perhaps we are doing instead is not actually adding value to our lives. Running this experiment doesn't require a workbook, uh, pur- purchasing a fancy meditation cushion, or buying trading new yoga courses. These practices, which are thousands of years old, can be done right in the comfort of your own town, own home, at the office, in your car, or really anywhere, just as you are. Afterward, reflection can take many forms, and you should adopt one that works for you. Reflection. Habit number four, collect your own data. Maybe like watch your all activity that happen in all of your day throughout your day. And habit number five, get support. In my experience as a meditation student and as a meditation teacher, the practices are initially helpful when done with the guidance of an instructor. The instructor can answer questions, help troubleshoot and problem solve, and most importantly, help you stick with and come back to your practice. One of my favorite things about teaching compassion course is the supportive environment that gets created within the group. It's unique opportunity to participate in community-based practice. I find it also helps renew one's optimism as it reminds us that we are not alone in these practices. Many authors are choosing to acknowledge suffering their own and other, and wish to see the relief of suffering. This notion can get lost at times when doing these practices in solitude. If you don't have the time or money for the class, don't don't despair. You might find support at the religious community or center in your area. If you have one, if you don't, enlist a friend or relative to support your effort to make compassion more of a habit. Someone who can encourage and remind you to stay on track and help you non-judgmentally troubleshoot the time when you just don't feel very compassionate in the midst of suffering. Get support. And number six, the last one, be open to possibilities and compassionate toward yourself. There are lots of good reasons why sometimes we intend to do compassion meditation practices, and yet, for whatever reason, we drop the ball. Often, what people do when this happens is engage in negative self-talk by implicitly or explicitly saying things to themselves, such as "I never stick with anything," "I'm a failure," or "I can't do this." Interestingly, there is no empirical evidence to suggest that beating ourselves up will actually help us change our behavior. In fact, some data suggest that this type of criticism can move us away from our goals rather than toward them. Additionally, one of the interesting opportunities that arise when we don't do our compassion meditation practices is to see if, in the moment, we can practice compassion for ourselves. While a bit meta, compassion for missing and compassion for missing the compassion practice. This is essentially one of the tests of our practice. Can we instead choose to have when we attempt to be harsh, critical, and judgmental with ourselves? Can we instead choose to have compassion, acknowledging our suffering, noting how this makes us human and that we are not alone, and trying to be gentle or kind with ourselves, or at least refrain from beating ourselves up? If you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. Often, the story that gets told about meditation is that it will be relaxing, stress relieving, and blissful. While all of these experiences are possible, for many people, that experience with meditation or compassion practices is the exact opposite of peaceful, relaxing, and positive. For example, for some depending on the practice, just focusing on breath, one breath uh, can bring about extreme anxiety or worry thoughts. Bringing to mind a loved one can bring up about grief and loss. Imagining oneself as a young child can bring about sadness or pain. Considering the suffering of all being may bring about guilt or overwhelmed. It's important to notice whether we are bringing any expectations to the compassion practice. Often people will say that the compassion practices are not working. When we investigate what they mean by this, they are often referring to the experience of not feeling relaxed after meditation. While relaxation and stress relief can be the goal of some meditation, in general, this is not the case with compassion meditation. Compassion is ultimately about suffering, which can at times feel difficult to sit with. Finally, people often brings the expectation that because a compassion practice generated a certain feeling or experience before, for example, yesterday or last week, it should or will generate a similar feeling or experience today. As I often tell my students, reality is constantly changing. Reality is constantly changing. Time is passing and the earth is rotating as you read this. And then it is a bit of a fallacy to expect that we and the practice will be the same day in and the day out, because the practice is different every day. We have something new to reflect on after each practice. It may simply be the case that the activities aren't right for you. If loving kindness doesn't seem to be increasing your compassion, try something else. Uh, like writing about time when you felt like someone showed compassion toward you, or the time when you felt spontaneous compassion for another. It is important to be open to another possibility. Perhaps compassion practice aren't what you need right now. The good news is that there are many varieties of different contemplative practices available that can help you to become more present and not judgmental. And this is all from uh, greatergood.berkeley.edu, talk about 6 habits of highly compassionate people, written by Horia Jasieri. And thank you so much for today.